An old man tied 3 helpless German Shepherd puppies to a tree. Then a soldier did something no one expected. They were left to die. 3 tiny lives, barely able to walk, bound to a tree with thin rope. Abandoned beneath a blazing sun. No food, no water, no hope. People passed, some glanced, some frowned, but no one stopped. Until a soldier, just back from deployment and carrying wounds no one could see, came across them. What he did next changed everything. This story will renew your belief in second chances, in loyalty, and in the unbreakable bond between a warrior and the voiceless souls he chose to save. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. That's what helps us keep bringing you stories like this, straight to your heart. It was the kind of heat that stole your breath, the dry, unforgiving blaze of late summer in a dusty rural town near El Paso, Texas, the kind of heat that cracked the ground and sent even the birds into silence. But for 3 German Shepherd puppies tied to a mesquite tree on the edge of an overgrown lot, there was no escape. Barely 6 weeks old, paws too big for their shaky legs, ears not yet upright. The oldest, a dark-furred pup with searching eyes, let out a small yelp. Not from pain, but panic. His littermates, one sandy brown, and the other with a snowy patch, on her chest whimpered in reply. The rope dug into their necks as they twisted, confused, starving, desperate for the mother who had vanished hours before. The man who left them hadn't said a word. An elderly neighbor watched from behind her curtain, shaking her head in disbelief. She'd seen him. Rusty pickup, no rush. He'd tied the pups with fraying rope, wiped sweat from his brow, looked once around and drove off. Just like that. She'd called animal control, but no one answered. And deep down, she didn't believe anyone would come. Not here. Not for 3 discarded lives. But someone was coming. Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes had been home just 12 days after 8 years in the Army and 2 overseas deployments. He'd returned to his late father's land to settle the estate, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what life looked like on the other side. The town still whispered of childhood memories, but it felt different now. Quieter, emptier, like the piece of him that once belonged here had been replaced by something heavier. That day, Daniel was walking down the dirt road, boots kicking up dust, eyes scanning the horizon from habit. He hadn't meant to go far, just far enough to breathe, past the tightness in his chest. Silence used to soothe him. Now it made his ears ring. That's when he heard it. A weak yelp, broken and soft. Then another. He froze. Thought it was a memory, one of the ghosts he carried. But it came again, sharp and real. He followed the sound across the lot, past a sagging fence until he saw them. 3 tiny figures tied up, panting, barely alive. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He rushed forward, dropped to his knees. The smell hit him. Dirt, sweat, and something worse. Fear. The brown pup lay curled, glassy-eyed, barely hanging on. The smallest flinched at his shadow, but the oldest one, dark-furred and trembling, tried to growl. Daniel's heart cracked. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." He pulled a small knife from his pocket, cutting the ropes with care. One by one, the pups slumped into his arms. Fur stretched thin over bone, too quiet. He opened his canteen, trickled water into his hand, offered it gently. They drank like they hadn't in days. He looked around. Who could do this? His jaw tightened, anger rising fast and hot. But underneath it, something deeper stirred, something he hadn't felt since the uniform. Responsibility. He gathered the puppies close, holding them like broken pieces of something sacred. "You're coming with me," he murmured. He'd seen too much to walk away. As he turned back toward his truck, the tiniest pup lifted her head and laid her chin on his wrist. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something healing, for them and for him. He didn't have a plan. He'd never raised puppies. The Army had trained him to handle explosives, to survive under fire, but not for this. Not for three trembling souls looking up at him like he was the only thing left between them and the dark. He brought them into his father's old garage, a space that still smelled like oil, sawdust, and distant memories. He cleared a corner, laid out 2 worn sleeping bags, and gently placed the pups down. They were weightless. The smallest, the one with the white patch, barely moved. She whimpered every time he touched her, bracing for pain. Daniel knelt beside her, opened a can of wet food he'd grabbed on the way home. "I don't even know your names," he whispered. He dipped his fingers into the food and brought it, gently to the smallest pup's mouth. She flinched at first, but then her tongue brushed his fingers, tentative, trembling. Her tiny jaw moved slowly, chewing with effort. The other 2 followed. The brown one ate hungrily, while the dark-coated one locked eyes with Daniel, never looking away, even as he swallowed each bite. Daniel leaned back against the wall and exhaled, a deep breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His whole body had been taut, wound tight since he got home, since the funeral, since the quiet had swallowed everything. He looked down at the pups now curled together under the blanket. Their bellies rose and fell with uneven breaths. Vulnerable, peaceful. There was something raw and honest in it, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Later that night, the smallest one began to cry, a thin, wounded sound that cut through the stillness of the garage and landed in Daniel's chest like a weight. He sat up instantly, heart thudding the way it used to on night patrol. He moved to them instinctively, scanning for signs of injury, sickness. She was shaking. He scooped her up gently, wrapped her in the corner of his hoodie, and held her close, against his chest. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now, I promise." She quieted, and for the first time in months, so did his thoughts. The next morning, Daniel woke stiff, still propped against the wall. The pup with the white patch, he'd started thinking of her as the tiny one, was fast asleep in the crook of his arm. The others were curled at his feet. Sunlight poured through the cracked garage window. He hadn't planned to keep them. That wasn't the plan. He figured once they were healthy, he'd call a rescue group, maybe someone at the base who worked with dogs. But these weren't just any strays. He could tell by the way they moved even now, weak and shaky. They were different. Purpose-bred. These were working-line German shepherds, almost certainly from a litter intended for police or military duty. Someone had invested in them, and still, someone had left them to die. He couldn't wrap his head around it. That afternoon, Daniel carried the pups into the house for the first time. It had sat untouched since his father passed, dust-covered. Every surface. A few coffee cups still sat on the counter. The mail had piled high on the table. It hadn't been a home in years, not since his mother died. His father had grown cold, distant, hard, just like Daniel had. But now, as the puppies stumbled through the living room, tripping over their paws, sniffing table legs, barking softly, at their reflections in the fireplace glass, something shifted. They brought life, noise, warmth. Daniel found himself laughing, a real laugh. Sudden, full, surprised. The brown one, he'd started calling him Rusty, crashed headfirst into an empty laundry basket and flipped over with a squeak. The dark pup barked in protest, then came to sit beside Daniel, tail thumping, eyes sharp and knowing. Focus. Loyalty. Daniel reached out, scratched behind the pup's ear. "You're trouble, aren't you?" he murmured. "But you've got fire." I like that. He hadn't realized just how hollow he'd become, until something filled the space again. And it wasn't just the dogs who were healing. Something inside him, something long buried, cracked and forgotten, had started to stir. It felt like the beginning, for all of them. 3 days had passed since Daniel brought the puppies into the house, and already things had begun to change, not just in them, but in him. The smallest pup, the one with the white crescent on her chest, was now Luna. She'd finally started eating with confidence. The brown one, Rusty, never left Daniel's side. Clumsy, loyal, always close. And the dark-coated one, he had a name now too, Axel. There was something about the way he watched Daniel, like a soldier sizing up a commanding officer. Calm, steady, aware, too smart for his age, almost uncanny. And in those eyes, Daniel saw something familiar, something he recognized from the mirror. And the battlefield, resilience, a quiet kind of expectation. That pup wasn't just clever, he was different, special. That morning, Daniel sat on the porch, a mug of black coffee in hand, while the pups explored the overgrown yard. He'd started building a small enclosure out back, using scrap wood from the old shed, something to keep them safe from coyotes at night. As he hammered, he realized he was humming, a habit he hadn't slipped into since before the war. Then, a car rolled slowly down the dirt road. Daniel tensed. The black sedan came to a stop just across from the driveway, engine idling. After a pause, the tinted window rolled down. A man leaned out, mid-60s, sharp-eyed, wearing a low-brimmed hat. "You Reyes?" the man called. Daniel stood, coffee still in hand. "Who's asking?" The man didn't smile. "Name's Griggs. Heard you've got some dogs here." Daniel didn't respond. Griggs tilted his head. 3 German Shepherd pups, working breed, valuable litter. Daniel's voice was even. "Why would I have them?" Griggs didn't flinch. "Because I was supposed to pick them up 4 days. Go. From a breeder named Connor Slate. Got there and he said they were already gone, said a friend took them, someone who'd give them a better shot." Daniel's jaw tightened. Connor Slate. He'd seen that name on mail tucked among his father's things. His dad had done business with breeders before, though Daniel never paid much attention. Griggs glanced toward the yard. "That one yours?" Axel had stepped into view, silent, alert, standing at the edge of the porch. Tail still, ears sharp. "Good posture," Griggs murmured. "That pup's got drive." "They're just pups," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Found 'em in a ditch." Griggs narrowed his eyes. "You're not just a civilian, are you?" Daniel didn't answer. "I'm not here to start anything," Griggs added. "But those dogs, they weren't dumped. They were hidden. That old man knew what he was doing." Daniel's voice was low, steady. "If that man tied them to a tree and left them to die, he's not fit to own a houseplant, let alone a hybrid. Canine litter." Griggs raised an eyebrow. "So that makes them yours?" Daniel stepped off the porch. "No, it makes them nobody's. Until someone shows up who gives a damn. That was me." There was a long pause. Then, just barely, Griggs smirked. "Guess. They got lucky." Before Daniel could speak, the window rolled up. The car turned, kicking dust in its wake as it pulled away. Daniel stood there, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with something else. Understanding. These dogs hadn't just been discarded. They were valuable. And now someone knew where to find them. That night, Daniel sat by the window, shotgun leaning beside the door. The pups lay asleep in their crate. Safe, unaware. But Daniel didn't sleep. Questions swirled. Why hide them? Why abandon them in plain sight? And why did Axel, the pup with the soldier's eyes and unflinching gaze, look at him like he understood more than any dog should? The next morning, Daniel opened a drawer in his father's old desk, the one that had always been locked. Inside was a file, contracts, certifications, breeding papers. One name stood out over and over: K9 Elite Tactical Training Program, San Antonio Division, and clipped beneath a faded photo of a dog that looked just like Axel were the words, Sire, Maximus. Deceased in service. KIA. Daniel stared at the image, chest tight. It all made sense now. These weren't just dogs. They were legacies. By the end of the week, a rhythm had settled into the house. The pups had learned his footsteps on the hardwood. They knew when it was time to eat, time to rest, and time to play. But more than that, something real was forming. Not just routine. Trust. Rusty, the brown one, was goofy and uncoordinated, always the first to stumble over his own paws. Luna, sweet and shy, would trail Daniel like a shadow, curling up beside him whenever he paused long enough. But Axel was something else entirely. He didn't just obey commands. He studied them. Daniel hadn't set out to train them. Not on purpose, but muscle memory's hard to ignore. He'd toss a tennis ball and Axel brought it back, eyes locked, focus sharp. One whistle, quick and firm, and Axel would halt, pivot, and sit like he'd done it 100 times already. It wasn't typical puppy behavior, far from it. That morning, Daniel decided to put a theory to the test. Out back beneath the open blue sky, he laid out a makeshift course using barrels, trash bins, and battered boxes. Nothing fancy, just enough to see how they'd handle it. Rusty chased a butterfly before the second turn. Luna froze midway through, nervous and unsure, but Axel locked eyes with Daniel. "Stay," he said. Axel sat. "Come." Axel moved. "Down." And the pup dropped flat in an instant. Daniel stared, heartbeat ticking like a drum. He knelt, placing a steady hand on the pup's back. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he whispered. "Or maybe it's just in your blood." Axel didn't twitch, didn't blink, just waited, calm, focused, present, and Daniel felt it, deep and old. Purpose. Later that day, he opened the file again. His finger traced the sire's name. Maximus, a war dog, decorated, heroic, who'd saved 3 soldiers in Syria before dying in action. And now, his son was sleeping under Daniel's roof. Suddenly, it all clicked. The awareness, the control, that fire in Axel's stare. These weren't just random pups. They were bred for something greater, and someone had tried to wipe that away. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced, restless, thoughts churning. Why had Connor Slate, once a trusted breeder, let them go? Why abandon them instead of calling the program? What was he hiding? Then came the noise, soft but sharp, a thud, then another. Daniel froze, moved to the window, saw movement near the shed, a shadow, a figure. Someone was on his land. He didn't think twice, grabbed the shotgun, slipped outside, silent as habit. The moon lit the gravel drive. By the shed, a man crouched, flashlight, scanning. "Hey," Daniel called. The man froze, then bolted. Daniel didn't shoot. But Axel did something even more shocking. The pup burst ahead, barking low and fierce, a sound far too mature for a puppy. He moved fast, faster than the others, cutting between Daniel and the man's escape path. The intruder stumbled in shock, hit the dirt hard, then scrambled into his car and tore off down the road. Daniel scooped Axel up, heart pounding. "You just held the line," he whispered, stunned. "You weren't scared. You protected." Axel gave a single lick to his chin and settled in Daniel's arms, calm as ever. That was the moment Daniel realized this wasn't a pet. This was a partner. The next morning, the decision was clear. He wasn't giving them up. Not to a program, not a shelter, and definitely not to whoever wanted them erased. Because they weren't just strays anymore. They were his mission now, and he wasn't about to fail them. Daniel had faced real fear in combat, but nothing chilled him like the idea that someone had crept onto his land in the dead of night. 4 puppies. Axel's courage had sealed it. These dogs weren't forgotten, they were hunted. At dawn, Daniel drove into town. Axel riding shotgun, tall, alert, like he belonged, like he knew the world had sharp edges and he was ready to meet them. Daniel pulled into the gravel lot behind the sheriff's station. Sheriff Boone had known him since his teens and hadn't changed a bit. Sturdy frame, silver hair, voice like gravel. He leaned back in his chair as Daniel stepped inside. "Well, if it ain't Staff Sergeant Reyes," Boone squinted at the pup. "That your new recruit?" Daniel gave a half smile. "I need a favor." He laid it all out. The abandonment, the file he'd found in his father's desk, the visit from Griggs, the figure outside the shed. Boone listened without interrupting, then leaned forward. "You're not wrong about the program," he said. "Mump K9 Elite Tactical. It's private, well-funded, and they don't like bad press. Had a few incidents." "What kind of incidents?" Daniel asked. "Failed litters. Temperament problems. One case, 3 pups sold too early. One of them snapped. Bit a kid." Daniel's jaw tightened. So they cover it up? Boone nodded. Either the program handles it or the breeder does. Quietly. No news stories. No lawsuits. Connor Slate, Daniel said low. Boone nodded again. Yeah, his name's been flagged before. Breeds for the program. Pushes hard. Doesn't like questions. Daniel looked down. Axel lay beside his boot, calm and steady. He's not dangerous, Daniel said. He's disciplined, sharp, loyal. I've served with soldiers who had less heart than him. Boone studied the pup a moment. Doesn't look like trouble to me. He's not, Daniel said. But someone out there thinks he is. Boone sighed. I'll run Slate's name again, ask around. But be careful, Daniel, these people, they don't knock twice. By the time Daniel got home, it wasn't just protectiveness he felt. It was a target on his back. He reinforced. The windows, moved the pup's crate into his bedroom, kept the shotgun within reach. That night, while feeding them, sitting cross-legged on the floor, he opened the folder again. Axel curled up by his leg, tail flicking lazily. Daniel traced. The bloodline chart. Maximus, KIA in Syria, Medal of Valor. Delilah, the dam, still alive, somewhere on a breeding farm owned by the program. Then he saw it. A note scribbled at the bottom of the page. Handwritten. Batch 0099A. Rejected litter 2. Unstable. Destroy by end of week. Daniel's UR. Breath caught. Rejected. Destroyed. That was the plan. His fingers clenched the paper. They were never supposed to make it, he said under his breath. And now someone wants to finish what the breeder started. Daniel stood slowly, eyes on the pups. Luna lay belly up, dreaming, paws twitching. Rusty chewed the corner of the couch. And Axel stared straight at him, waiting. You're not rejects, Daniel whispered. You're survivors. He crossed the room, opened the closet, and pulled out an old duffel, army green, heavy canvas. He hadn't touched it since coming home. Inside, training gloves, utility gear, a whistle, and a purpose. He wasn't just going to guard them. He was going to train them, make them strong, make them matter. Because if someone wanted to erase them, they'd have to go through him first. The next morning started like any other. The pups were growing. Rusty had filled out, bounding through the yard. Luna wagged her tail with newfound confidence. Axel, always alert, was starting to respond to Daniel's voice like he was born to. Behind the house, Daniel had started building something. A rough obstacle course made from tires and old lumber. Jumps, tunnels, and turns. He'd built it all from scrap. Makeshift jumps from old wood. A scent station using worn gloves and tuna. What began as curiosity had become ritual. Axel was thriving. His stance, his precision. His eyes tracked Daniel's every word with the kind of focus Daniel once drilled into soldiers. It wasn't just instinct. It was deeper, as if Axel hadn't just obeyed, but chosen him. Good boy, Daniel murmured after a flawless run. Axel's tail thumped once, proud and calm. Back inside, Daniel opened the folder again. Batch 0099A. Rejected for instability. But there had been no signs, no aggression, no erratic behavior. Nothing to justify what had happened to those pups. So why? He was still staring at the page when Luna started barking. Sharp, high-pitched. Not playful, not excited. Warning. Daniel shot to the window. A black SUV was crawling up the dirt road. Steady. Unhurried. Intentional. He grabbed the shotgun and stepped outside, Axel close on his heels, low and alert. The SUV rolled to a stop, 20 yards out, engine running. The door opened. It wasn't Griggs. A younger man stepped out, slim build, tailored suit, dark glasses. No greeting, no smile, just stillness. He stood with his hands in his pockets, unreadable behind the lenses. Daniel called out, "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head. "Mr. Reyes, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." Daniel didn't blink. "You've got the wrong house." "I don't think so," the man replied. "You're in possession of 3 classified breed German shepherds, property of the K-9 Elite Tactical Training Program. I'm here to collect them. Property, Daniel said, ice in his voice. You mean the pups someone tied to a tree and left to die? They were scheduled for removal, the man said calmly. It was a directive from our program director. You shouldn't have interfered. You tried to kill them. We were correcting a mistake. Daniel's grip tightened on the shotgun. They're not mistakes. Behind him, Axel stood tall, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The man gave a nod to the SUV. The back door opened. Another figure stepped out carrying a black case. Not for bullets, tranquilizers, but the threat was clear. Take them alive if possible, by force if needed. I'm only saying this once, Daniel warned, and get off my land. The man in the suit took one slow step forward. You were a soldier, Reyes. You know how this works. Orders are orders. You think you're protecting them, but all you're doing is delaying the inevitable. Daniel raised the barrel an inch. I'm not delaying anything, he said. I'm stopping it. The man glanced at Axel. He's already bonding. He muttered, Unbelievable. Then he nodded at his partner. The man with the case stepped forward. Daniel didn't fire. Not yet. Because Axel moved first. A blur of black and fire, he darted forward and planted himself in the intruder's path. Barking so fiercely the man froze. His bark echoed through the valley. Luna and Rusty joined in, smaller, but no less determined, growling, standing their ground. Together they formed a living barrier between danger and home. The man holding the case began to back away, slowly, cautiously. The suited one took a final look at Daniel, then turned and stepped back into the SUV. No words, no promises. The vehicle reversed, flinging dust into the sky and vanished down the road. Daniel's pulse thundered. He dropped to one knee, took Axel's face in his hands. You chose to protect them, he whispered, just like me. That night, Daniel locked every door, but for the first time he didn't feel alone. Because this wasn't just about saving pups anymore. It was about standing up to something bigger. And for the first time in years, Daniel Reyes had something worth fighting for, and someone willing to fight with him. No more cars came, no more threats, just quiet. But Daniel knew it wasn't over, so he gathered everything, the files, the photos, the records, and handed them over to Sheriff Boone. The investigation started quietly, but weeks later, it all came out. The K-9 Elite Tactical Program was exposed. Connor Slate was arrested. Justice had its day. And the pups, they stayed. Rusty found a home with a boy on the autism spectrum. Luna was adopted by a retired military widow who said she hadn't smiled. Years. Until Luna. And Axel. Axel never left Daniel's side. They trained, they healed. They visited schools, VA centers, and shelters, showing people that even the discarded deserve another chance. And now, when Daniel looked at Axel, he didn't just see a dog, he saw redemption.